Number one, treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. Number two, criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And number three, try to root everything you do in love and compassion.
Hello, dear friends and damn givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lapara, and this is the show where I sit down for meaningful conversations with people who aim to build fewer walls, longer bridges, and bigger tables with their lives and work. My guests want to leave the planet much better than they found it. And I truly hope today's conversation gives you hope and pushes you to give more damns than ever before. Friends, I sure hope you at this point have had a chance to listen to last week's conversation with Matthew McConaughey. If not, make it happen. For obvious reasons, I got tons of feedback this past week after y'all listened to that conversation. It was so great, and I think you'll benefit from listening to it. So make sure you do that very soon. Also, some of y'all asked which app Matthew uses for journaling. He mentioned in our conversation that he switched recently from writing in a physical journal to writing in a digital journal. So I asked him this morning, and he said that he uses the native Notes app on the iPhone. So if you have an iPhone, it's the native app that you can write things down in on the iPhone. I use it religiously for all of my notes, for all of my research, for all of my journaling. I use Notes, and I love it so much. So if you have an iPhone, use the native Notes app if you want to do what Matthew McConaughey is doing. And if you don't have an iPhone, what are you even doing with your life? Just kidding. You can have whatever phone you want, but my recommendation and Matthew's recommendation will only work if you have an iPhone. So I hope that's helpful for some of y'all. Onward. My guest this week is absolutely brilliant, and I don't say that lightly. Absolutely brilliant. After spending a year as a Bartley Fellow at the Wall Street Journal, Chloé Valdary developed the Theory of Enchantment, an innovative framework for compassionate antiracism that combines social-emotional learning, character development, and interpersonal growth as tools for leadership development in the boardroom and beyond. So Chloé is now teaching this curriculum all over the world to regular lay people and to people leading companies and in so many different places. And we are so lucky to have her on the show today to talk about treating people like human beings, not political abstractions, talk about criticizing to uplift and empower, not to destroy, and to talk about rooting everything we do in love and compassion. Everything feels so fucking crazy right now. And this conversation was a deep breath of fresh air for me. And I hope it'll be the same for you. So let's get right into it. As a reminder, you can anytime and for any reason email me at hello@letsgiveadamn.com, or you can text me at 646-328-6414. And friends, please join our texting community. I'm paying a lot of money for it, and it's a fantastic way to connect. So please text today, 646-328-6414. And without further ado, let's get right into my conversation with the incredibly smart and wise Chloé Valdary. Let's go. So great to have Chloé Valdary on the Let's Give a Damn podcast today. Hello, Chloé. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I am super thrilled for this conversation, and I'll tell you why. So it literally, the entirety of our conversation is going to be wrapped up right now at the beginning before we even start with, I have a friend of mine who we are not completely opposites politically, but we don't believe a lot of the same things about the world and about politics and about society, right? But he's a stand-up dude, a wonderful guy. And we spar back and forth, always healthy, always never crazy. And he's the one who I'd never heard of you until about a month ago when he said, hey, we're always talking about how to do this better. And he believes the best of me. I believe the best of him. And he's like, you've got to check out Chloé Valdary. And he sent me your Twitter and Theory of Enchantment and was like, check this out. You've got to have her on the show. She's going to help provide some really great context for these huge conversations that were happening. So interestingly enough, we're going to talk a lot about what happened between My friend and I, like
Okay.
we you know, we don't agree on a lot of the same stuff. And he said, I think Chloe can, shed some light on that. So all that to say, I wanted to give some context for how I even, heard about you. So
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have you on the show since he told me about you and since I emailed you a few weeks ago when we first put this, conversation in the books. I've been checking out your stuff, watched your incredible, TED Talk, and I am so thrilled for you to help us today. And for I feel like I'm going to be a student today. I feel like you have a lot to teach me and to teach us because I am. Are you familiar with the Enneagram at all?
Very vaguely.
Okay,
It's like the one I can't actually understand. I know what
got
it
it.
is, but I
Yeah.
don't actually get it.
Well, that's not rare. It is kind of weird, but I'm on the Enneagram. I'm an 8. I'm a protector. I'm a challenger. I am
Okay.
like high strung, type A, super extroverted. I want to spend every single day fixing shit. Right? I see something that's
Yeah.
wrong, and I want to go fix it. And that leads me a lot of times to do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing, be way too polarizing, honestly. And so I'm super excited about this. Before we get going into Theory of Enchantment, before you introduce what you do, I want to know who you are. So go back as far as you want and give us some context for who you are, who are the kind of big players in your life, people that influenced you, shaped you, where did you grow up, how did you grow up? Because usually I find some indications in that story
Yeah.
for how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I always highlight the fact that I grew up in a very religiously fascinating environment. I grew up in a Christian home that was very similar to the brand of Christianity, if you're familiar with it, called Seventh-day Adventist.
Yep, I
So
know
it
it
wasn't
well.
Seventh-day Adventist, but it was very similar in the sense that we went to church on Saturday instead of Sunday. We also observed all of the holy days out of the Old Testament. Instead of the traditional Christian holidays like Christmas and Easter, we celebrated holidays like Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. And not only that, we spent our Christmases learning about the history of the Roman Catholic Church and Emperor Constantine, and some good old-fashioned Roman Catholic history. I'd like to mention that because that upbringing meant that I was steeped in a culture that was both Orthodox and curious. And there's a tension between those two things. Orthodox in the sense that, I would be in church every week. I had to observe all the holidays very much. It was a mandate in the home, but curious in the sense that it was built upon a tradition of questioning tradition, of questioning mainstream thought, of questioning what had come before. So I think that the tension between those two things has certainly shaped my life, and certainly the idea of both sitting in the space and sitting in the tension between orthodoxy and curiosity is something that I have had to do as a result of my upbringing. I will also say that upbringing made me very cosmopolitan, in the sense that it gave me a perception of history that others may not have gotten growing up. So, for example, if you're 5 years old and on December 25th, you're learning about Emperor Constantine. You have a very much, I think, wide scope of or understanding of the sweep of history at an early age, and that really made me realize that, New Orleans is not the only place that exists. This year is not the only place that exists. I had a very grand sense of the past, and the way it loomed heavy on my perception of things. I think continues to this day. Later on in life, I actually went to Rome. That was my first trip to Europe, actually, and experienced a very interesting, similar, I think, relationship or inflection point that could be described as a deep relationship with the past. I encountered the art of Bernini, for example, and it just like blew me away. And I was very fascinated by the level of artistry in his sculptures, but also taken aback by the fact that because his sculptures were so ancient, it was as if history was loudly booming at me, remember your mortality. So it was a very, I would say, simultaneously transcendent and kind of depressing experience. But again, that cosmopolitan upbringing was very important. And the last thing I'll say about this upbringing is that because of the tradition of like peeling back the layers and seeing, well, how did these traditions come to be? How did Christmas come to be? How did Easter come to be? I think I subconsciously or inadvertently developed a love of, for lack of a better word, a concept of archetypes. So if you're familiar with the work of Carl Jung, who I'm obsessed with, I sort of fell into that pattern of thinking before even discovering that Carl Jung was a thing or was a person, was an actual figure who lived. And I think that a lot of Theory of Enchantment is actually very much sort of channeling the whole like archetype landscape, and the idea of archetypes as being useful to help us navigate the human condition and pursue transcendence. So
that's super fascinating. And now I have 1,000,001 questions. Holy shit. There's actually a lot of similarities between the way that you grew up and the way that I grew up. Mm-hmm. And I'm ever thankful for it. So mm-hmm. I was born in New York, raised in Guatemala. My dad came to the US when he was a kid as an undocumented immigrant. And we ended up going back later on in life and spent 10 years there. And then before actually settling down, and I do settling down in air quotes because we've really never settled down. I've been married for 12 years and we've lived in 3 different states in 12 different homes in 12 years. Like we just can't find home yet. But before that, between high school and when I got married, I spent 6 years living out of 2 suitcases, traveling the world. And but yet I grew up in a very, not this Seventh-day Adventist like upbringing. I grew up in a very conservative, fundamentalist Christian background, very fundamentalist Baptist. And as I get older, I see that I see this tension that you've brought out, right? This orthodoxy, right? Or in other words, to put it very simply, like you don't question things. This is how it is. This is how things are. You read it in the Bible, you don't question it. It just is what it is. Yeah. But yet everything around me, I was so curious about it. Yeah. I couldn't, it wasn't the same things. Like we did do the traditional holidays, so it's not like a 1-for-1, but there was so many things to be curious about. Mm-hmm. And it left me always wanting to know more. I mean, if you ask I'm one of 12 kids. My parents had 12 kids. And if you ask, I was second oldest. If you ask my dad right now, who's the kid that gave you the most hell? It was like, without even thinking about it, he says Nick. It was Nick, because Nick would never, Dad says, do this or believe this, or this is how things are. And I would always say, why? Why? Like, don't just tell me this is how it is. Yeah. Show me. Like, let's dive into this a little bit. And to this day, I'm still seeing that in my life. It's why I'm involved in so many different things. I mean, this podcast started out as a curiosity project. It was, I want to figure out how people are giving a damn in the world. And I want to figure out, and I want to do that and then pass it along to other people, right? And so that's super curious. I love that orthodoxy versus curiosity thing. And it seems like also, you mentioned kind of just having this bigger worldview as a result. If you're learning history, if you're learning about Constantine instead of Santa Claus, if you're learning about all these different things and places, and if you know that this is not the only state, right? Louisiana is not the only state. Yeah. United States is not the only country. Yeah. And right. And this is not the only time, right? Yeah. I don't know if you feel this, but it's not uniquely American, but it does feel sort of uniquely American. And I can say this because I've traveled the world. Like, we're not good learners, and our education system hasn't
People say this, yes, about us.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, it's not even me saying it as a half American. It's like everybody looks at us and says we have the most expensive education in the world, and we have some of the lowest like benefits as a result of that. Yeah. And so we don't, I find people right now. We're living in Nashville, Tennessee, and we're hoping that's coming. We're hoping that's coming to. You're in New York City, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in Brooklyn.
We're hoping to move to New York next. We've got 3 little kids, and we want to raise them in New York. So we're gonna try that next year. We'll see how that works out. But right now I'm in Nashville, and it's been wild to see how many people that are now my neighbors and friends and in my community that have never really left this bubble. Like they go to the same place for a vacation every year. It's like the Outer Banks in North Carolina or Disney World or whichever one is in Florida. I've never been. Never want to go.
I think
but
Disney World,
and they've lived kind of in this 3-state radius.
Yeah.
And that affects how they think, how they live, the decisions they make, what they eat, who they engage with. Mm-hmm. And so I love as well, that's the last thing I'll point out from your sort of like opening statement is it feels like you and I both had an untraditional and un-American, if I can put it that way, upbringing, because that's just not what most people are experiencing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know anything about like the aggregate American experience in terms of like travel. I am inclined to slightly disagree just because by definition we are Americans, and so we sort of complicate the stereotype. It's also ironic because America has the stereotype of like the pioneering spirit. And to your point, a lot of people in the country do stay where they are. I would say also for me, like growing up, I also like didn't travel so far physically in terms of like, you know, maybe we went to Texas we did go to Texas often for, to visit Six Flags, for example. Many summers, which was great. So it's not like I traveled a lot physically, but because of the educational upbringing I did have, which I recognize is sort of probably a bit of an addendum to the official, you know, educational experience I received going to elementary school, high school, and college. Although I will say I went to some very, very, I think, really good schools. It was that extra education I received that definitely expanded my vision and perception of the world. So, yeah, I mean, I think maybe we have to work a little bit overtime or, you know, better our institutions to serve our students better. So.
Yeah, I think it's a both and I already love. I'm already loving this this conversation because I'm learning a little bit more about you. You know, you pushed back rightfully so on. You know, for one, we'll get into this. You're sort of. One of your visions is that we would stop caricaturing and stereotyping, right? People, because that leads to this Enneagram 8 here. I'm pointing to myself, saying things like you had an un-American upbringing, which I know what I'm saying by that, which is like you're not most people, but you're right. I mean, America is whether we're representing that well or not. America is this melting pot of ideas and people and cultures. And again, this experiment is not going well, in my opinion, but it still is who and what America is. And
absolutely,
so our journeys do fit in the American journey. It just might not be as popular as we, you know,
or representative or like broadcasted. It could be that there are a ton of people who are, or not a ton, but I don't know, a decent amount of people who have had these very diverse experiences whose stories just aren't broadcasted and we're just not exposed to them enough, but they're like waiting to be found, you know?
So we're going to get, in a minute, we're going to get into the theory of enchantment, this company and organization and idea that you have, that's become, it seems like your whole life and you're hella good at it. Yeah, exactly. But before we get there, give us the journey that led up to it, right? Like what were the circumstances surrounding you saying, okay, I've got to do this. Here's the name. Here's the idea. Let's go.
Sure. So I went to the University of New Orleans and studied international studies, which tracks international studies, concentration in conflict and diplomacy. Graduated in 2015 and moved to New York City because I had a job at the Wall Street Journal. And while at the Wall Street Journal, I was really intrigued by this idea that within the realm of conflict and diplomacy, there are all these frameworks that we talk about geopolitically to try to, like, combat conflict, whether it's, detente or other such things that have been discussed within the realm of geopolitics. So there are all these frameworks about teaching people how to combat conflict, but there are no frameworks that teach people explicitly and expressly how to love. And so I wanted to, I noticed that, wait a minute, these things are not the same things. They're interrelated, but they're not the same things. And so I wanted to see if I could develop a framework that would teach people how to love. And I asked myself a series of questions in developing the structure of the thesis. And the first question was, if I want to teach people how to love, then maybe I have to ask, well, what are people already in love with? And then work backwards from there. It's, in retrospect, I'm realizing it's like the Carl Jung in me that's like, noticing patterns and like seeing if there's something to be derived out of the pattern. So, the biggest source of data content that showed me what people were in love with was pop culture. And so at that point, I started to study these massive companies and influencers within the zeitgeist that seem to command a religious like devotion from their fans and from their consumers. Companies like Nike, companies like Disney, influencers like Beyonce, to see if there was some common denominator. And the common denominator that I discovered was that all of these entities and these influencers were creating content where their audience saw themselves and their potential reflected in the content. And this may sound very basic, but it's actually no small accomplishment. We take for granted the fact that Nike has the slogan, "Just Do It," but there's a lot of human psychology like packed into that one phrase. There's a lot of, I would say, the observations of psychologist Abraham Maslow's views on self-actualization embodied in that phrase, this idea that if you wear a Nike shoe or if you buy a Nike piece of Nike apparel, you'll be able to overcome anything. You'll be able to just do it. And human beings are very much in search of, in pursuit of self-actualization. This idea that almost every Disney movie ever made is a motif for the human condition. It's a hero, imperfect, flawed, overcoming some obstacle, and in the process becoming heroic, and self-actualizing in the process as well. And finally, Beyonce, who says things like, "Who run the world, girls," and many women see themselves and their potential reflected in that content. So that was sort of like, oh, there's like a pattern here that I discovered, and I decided to call that phenomenon by which these companies created that content and by which people discovered sort of their potential that was like ripe for, I think, coming into fruition. I just decided to call that process enchantment. The reason I call it enchantment was for two reasons. Number one, enchantment is already associated with Disney. Obviously Disney has like the magical kingdom and is known as sort of this enchanted place, as a set of enchanted films and stories. But at the same time, I was also reading a book by Guy Kawasaki, the former marketing director of Apple.
Love him. Yep.
Who wrote a book called Enchantment. Talked about how Steve Jobs used this concept in a lot of his like marketing, and defined enchantment as the process by which you delight someone. And it's not as mundane as simply, again, seeing that Nike apparel and thinking that you will be able to overcome any obstacle by wearing it. It's as profound as, a child who is abandoned discovering that they have internal worth. It runs the gamut in terms of the I think the surface level understanding of it and the depth level application of it. So that's why I picked the term. And after I finished the thesis, I worked for a nonprofit for 2 years, refined it, lectured, came up with 3 principles that this process of enchantment was rooted in. And then eventually enough people were like, you need to go off on your own and go off on your own journey and adventure and establish a LLC. And so I did. And that's what I've been working on for the past 2 years now.
So it's quite the journey, in other words. Like, this is not something that happened overnight. you know, a lot
Not
of
at
people
all.
listening, we'll get into the specifics here in a minute, especially those, like, we're going to talk quite a bit, I think, about those three, you know, sort of principles that you came up with that I think are just fascinating. But talk for a second about, there's a lot of people that are listening that are probably have some big idea, some big vision, especially those that are sort of in the Let's Give a Damn family. They want to go out and do shit. They want to go out and help and love and fix and, you know, do all these things, right? They want to give a damn. But I see a lot of people burning out too quickly because it didn't come to fruition quick enough. It didn't happen overnight. Like, I'm sure there were plenty of times, maybe as you've been building this thing, where it didn't catch, or maybe it did. Maybe you were one of the lucky air quote ones where, you know, that it did take off overnight. But this is hard work. It's hard work to come up with this stuff, then begin to like really live it out and embody it. Really get to know the ideas, the vision, the mission, the materials, and then begin to build a following. Begin to build people that want to be in on this with you. So talk about that journey just for a minute before we get into the theory of enchantment. Like, how has your journey been building this? Hard, easy? What's sort of been some of the barriers as you've begun to build this organization and idea that you're spreading now to the entire world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, first of all, I didn't even, you know, the theory of enchantment was really primarily, at least initially, sort of an academic exercise. It wasn't, I didn't necessarily mean for it to be its own
you didn't
company.
know where it was going to go.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was going to be its own entity. I had no idea that it was going to be a full like practice and training, which it is now. It started out really as a 45-minute speech with three principles, with a little pop culture references sprinkled within. And so I think being pulled and pressured, good pressure, but pressure nonetheless, by people who were responding positively to that initial 45-minute speech really gave me the confidence and the courage to risk starting a company. But I will say I've had to pivot many different times. I had to pivot when I realized that a 45-minute speech with those three principles is not really a product per se. So I had to pivot in actually building out a full curriculum and a full program based upon those three principles. So that was a bit of a product pivot. And then I initially started I tried to sell to high schools because I wanted to get social emotional learning into the classroom, but specifically for high school students because that seemed to be lacking institutionally. But I've discovered that it is almost impossible to sell to high schools just because of the bureaucratic nature of educational institutions. Pre-COVID, it was a nightmare. Post-COVID, it's impossible. And I had to be open to that fact and not just try to ignore that fact. And then pivot again to sell a company. So the process of the research in and of itself took time. The process of the refinement took time. And then the process of building it into the entity that it is today took time. And even with the entity that it is today, the target markets have changed. Its different customer segments have changed. But I would recommend leaning into the process, understanding that pivoting is a part of business. You're supposed to pivot fast and early if you see that things aren't working out. And I wouldn't relate to, things not working out as an error, but rather as part of the learning process. And if things don't work out, you actually can't learn. So I think it's helpful to think of it in that way. And of course, be patient. I'm still it's a very young company, and I still and will always have to learn patience. And I haven't mastered patience, even though I've seen, some successes with the company. But in order to make this a long-term success, I definitely need to master patience.
Lots of good stuff in there. I'm reading Everything is Figure Outable by Marie Forleo right now. And
very cool.
It's a great book. She's a wonderful human that does so much for the world. But the section I'm reading right now is about this. People are so damn scared of failing, and that keeps man, I sometimes just to make myself angry, but also hopeful. Sometimes I just think about how much more good there could be in the world, how many more great organizations like Theory of Enchantment, how many more amazing projects, art, music, whatever it may be, would be in the world right now if people saw those momentary failures as it's just a speed bump. It's just a fucking speed bump. Like, just keep going. You get over the speed bump and you keep going, and that you want those things to happen.
You want you 100% want them to happen.
If you look at some of these people that have had it easy, that inherited a bunch of money, or that got famous on TikTok quickly or whatever, you look at, I was recently watching that mini documentary that Justin Bieber put out about his new song "Lonely." Like,
I should watch
my
that.
God.
I haven't seen that.
It's like, it's on YouTube. It's just like 20, 30 minutes, but that kid got famous so quickly, maybe quicker than anybody in the history of ever. and it almost ruined him. Because he didn't have those failures at first. He got embraced and he just like blew up, and then he had to fall and fail later on. Right now he's kind of, I think he's maturing. He's growing up. He's got a family now and everything. But and I was just, while you were saying that, I was thinking about last week's conversation, because this will come out next Tuesday. Yesterday, we released my conversation with Matthew McConaughey and his new book, Green Lights, right? And it's about these, obviously we're chasing, I titled it The Art of Chasing Green Lights. His book is called Green Lights.
Is this a Great Gatsby reference?
I don't know. So I admittedly have not read Great Gatsby. Maybe I should, but it's all about we're just chasing green lights. Like, everybody loves a green light. It means freedom. It means go. It means there's nothing keeping me from going. But knowing that if there's a green light, then there'll be a yellow and a red light at some point.
Yeah.
Right? And there'll be that moment where you are stopped within your control or outside of your control. And just keep pushing through, because it's going to turn green again. Yeah. Right?
It's also like the slowing down and the stopping is a part of life. It's important to understand this in an integrated way. And I think especially like the pandemic is forcing us to, whether we actually do it or not is a different question, but I think it's forcing us to contemplate the importance of slowing down. So
yeah, I could bore you to tears with talking about how all of my shit has like accelerated during the pandemic, because I had time in March when all this happened. I lost all of my work overnight. I'm self-employed. I have Let's Give a Damn, and it has multiple facets, but I have consulting clients that pay the bills. And when the pandemic hit, all of my consulting clients were things related to public speaking and live events and production and all that. Literally, it disappeared overnight. Wow. And so I took the latter half of and we had a huge tornado here in Nashville a week before we, got sent home for, the quarantine. And so it was a hard time here. And I took the latter half of March, beginning of April, and didn't do any work. And it was a lot of work, but I wasn't working for anybody else. It was just all me staring at blank notebook and a pen, and just started thinking through everything all over again. And that was that yellow and then that red light. And that prepared me for the upcoming green light after I did the hard work of, okay, so we're in this thing for God knows how long. How do we move forward? How do we figure things out during this time? So I love that. That story and your advice to everybody, because I think we just need to keep going. If you truly believe it's something, now if it's something that you aren't sure you should even be doing, of course, stop and go to something else. But if you know it's something that you want to do, like keep fucking going. Like keep going. It will develop as time goes by if you have what it takes and if you put the right, team and ideas and vision together. Super cool. Okay, so let's get into the theory of enchantment. I think it's wonderful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give in 15 minutes or so, or whenever we get done talking about this, I want you to, in light of the theory of enchantment, weigh in and help me weigh in on these last 6 months, the racial divide, right? Not just the pandemic. Forget the pandemic. Like, holy shit. Like, crazy stuff has happened. And then also our political stuff right now. Yeah. Like, it's insane.
Very much interrelated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
but I think to lay the groundwork for your feedback in our interactions in a few minutes, let's talk about these three and anything else you want to talk about theory of enchantment related. But I want to hit
Sure.
on these three points that you've come up with that you identified in your talk, and they've now become an integral part of your curriculum, for lack of a better word. So let's go into them.
So Theory of Enchantment program is rooted in three fundamental principles. Call them our first principles. They are as follows. Number one, treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. Number two, criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And number three, try to root everything you do in love and compassion. So those are the three principles. And then the program itself is 25 lessons. And the first third of the program, our clients learn how to actually develop a healthy relationship with themselves. They learn what it actually means to be a human being, dealing with imperfection, vulnerability, insecurity, mortality, parental baggage, emotional baggage, all the things that we deal with as human beings. The idea is to learn to make peace with that, develop a sense of inner contentment, wholeness, self-love. And then the remaining 2/3 is all about, now that you've learned how to be in a healthy relationship with yourself, you can go out and be in a healthy relationship with others, develop a capacity for empathy, practice love and compassion. Our whole premise is that you won't be able to develop that relationship with others if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself. So that's sort of like the why of the program. And then the how is we use a lot of pop culture. Going back to the original thesis, we use a lot of pop culture to teach these principles. And for me, like basically everything is pop culture. So, we teach James Baldwin, we teach Dr. King, we teach Maya Angelou, but we also teach John Mayer, we teach Disney films, we teach Lil Wayne, we teach Kendrick Lamar. It's a really fun, multi-generational, diverse, multicultural, I'd say, practice and content. And people, in addition to feeling elevated and transcendent, after going through the course, they also feel like they encounter a very rich coursework, which is really cool.
That's really cool. So let's go through each one of these, because I have a few questions about each probably.
Okay.
So let's start with number one. And these are so. Here's what I love about these. It all makes sense. Like people might not completely understand these three ideas and points, but you can't argue with them, right?
Yeah.
Like right off the bat, you're like, okay, that makes sense. Why are we all not living by these rules? But we're obviously not. If you just turn on fucking like Twitter right now, you're like, oh, none of that is on Twitter right now. So let's start. Treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. So yes, obviously, but why? Like it's so easy to treat people like political abstractions because politics right now, there's such, it seems like on the right and on the left, and I hate even doing that because people are always like, I grew up conservative. I am not conservative at all anymore, but I also have mountains of issues, like literally truckloads of issues with the family that I now live in, right? For one, I don't want to be identified with so many of them. And two, it's like, why are we putting each other in a box like that? But it seems like as I look at the political points that each side is standing by, is lauding, is touting right now, as a compassionate damn giver, I can't help but land somewhere on the left because it seems like it's more human-centered. It seems like it's more holistically pro-life, if we want to use that term, right? It seems like they want the most amount of people to do well. And the right doesn't. But then comes the problem of of reducing people to political abstractions. So how do we treat people? How do we see people's humanity before we see their political beliefs?
So I think that this is answered by what we do with our clients, which is we have them probe their own humanness. And we make our clients become, I think, pretty honest with who and what they are as imperfect beings. People who, as every single human being on planet Earth, must encounter and does encounter are challenged by feelings of inadequacy. And this is outside the realm of politics. This is just being human, right? Feelings of inadequacy, feelings of insecurity. Am I good enough? Am I worthy enough? Do I belong? These are basic, like what Abraham Maslow called deficiency needs that we all deal with. They include basic security needs like, food and water, but they also include psychological needs like a feeling of belonging and worthiness and esteem. And so we try to help our clients become self-aware. And this is why Theory of Enchantment is very much rooted in social emotional learning. So the answer lies in first becoming self-aware to understand that like these are the things that we need, that I need personally, that you need personally as a human being to be able to have a sense of fulfillment in these areas. Number one, every human being needs that. And when they are not fulfilled, we overcompensate for that lack. We overcompensate for that insecurity. We sometimes develop a sense of self-contempt, and then we overcompensate for that. And that can be manifested in a myriad of ways. It can be manifested in different forms of extremism, for example, including racism, but not just racism. But it can also be manifested in other ways that we don't necessarily think of as having political implications. So, for example, if you are a child who experiences abandonment in your upbringing, let's say your father is no longer in the picture, and you're feeling a sense of a lack of worthiness and a sense of esteem. And if you feel this is overwhelming, you may be pressured to, you may perceive a local group in your area as being able to fulfill that sense of wholeness for you. And we see this when a lot of young men gravitate toward gangs. We see this when, on a racial level, we see a lot of insecure men joining white nationalist groups. And so in order to actually uphold the principles of caring for people, caring for those who are downtrodden, caring for those who are, I guess you would say, poor in spirit, requires us to look beyond the caricatures that we place people in, and look into the psychological and I would say metaphysical aspect of people's lives. And that requires a certain amount of love that goes deeper than, are you in my tribe? Right. And that's why I care for you, versus believing what I think is the ultimate truth with it, which is the oneness of all human beings. And it's hard to practice that. But I do think that is what at least I try to aspire to.
It's very hard to practice that. It is much easier to not politically characterize people and to reduce people to political abstractions when you think about that every single one of us are hurt.
Yes.
And we're all on a journey, and we're all in different places on that journey, on the spectrum, but we're all yearning to be healed. Right?
Yes.
Like I saw earlier today, I saw a TikTok of this guy who was an obvious, like very, very loud and proud Trump supporter. And right now, for some reason, and I hate it, I'm trying to like keep myself off of TikTok, because half of TikTok is just Biden and Trump supporters going back and forth, criticizing the shit out of each other. And it's gotten to a really like ugly place. Okay, and he looked up at the camera and was responding to a comment that was left on one of his previous TikToks. And he said, yeah, I think we need a civil war to like fix this. He said, I think we need to just get rid of them all, is what he said. He said, they're something like they're pussy liberals and they don't know how to do the things we do. We can survive. We can go find water. And he goes, we can move. He said, we can shoot moving targets. That's what he said. And at first I was like, my first reaction was, holy shit, how did someone say that out loud for like the whole world to see? And then I was angry. And then throughout the day leading up to our conversation, I eventually got to the point where I was really sad for him. Not sad in like just really sad that somewhere along the way, this man has been hurt so deeply. and he's been so misled in life. And now he's finding, as you just talked about, he is out of his hurt and out of his pain and out of whatever has happened to him in his life, whether it's lack of father or too much father, like abuse in the home or whatever it is. He has lived in that hurt for so long that he doesn't care that he just got on TikTok and said, I want to wipe out half I would be in to wipe out half the population of my fellow citizens, not of some evil regime across the world, which is still wrong, but like my people, like my neighbors. If you vote for this person, I will kill you.
Yeah.
That's hurt people to like case in point, like exhibit A. And that's what happens when and I've done it. I've never said those things. God help me if I ever do. But that man is politically abstractionizing people, the other side, right?
Yes.
To a point where he's like, I don't care about your life anymore. I will end you if it means my guy getting in power again. And you can't say that. All that to say, let me wrap up. All that to say, you can't say that about another human if you're seeing them as a human.
Correct.
If you're stripping off the MAGA flag and you're stripping off, support for Biden, if you're taking all that away, you can't look at another person, and you're also a healthy and whole human, or at least on that journey. You can't look at somebody and say, I want you dead, and I'll do it myself if I have to.
Which is why that first principle is so critical, basic, but very critical. And I mean, I'm not surprised, unfortunately, that a lot of rhetoric has, I think, increased to, quite frankly, on a genocidal, have become sort of genocidal. And I've seen this across the political spectrum. This is why we teach, there's actually a whole host of Disney films from the Disney Renaissance between 1989 and 1999, where 10 Disney films came out that are considered to be the Disney Renaissance. And a lot of those films dealt with what happens when people are caricatured. This was portrayed in the movie Pocahontas. If you study the song Savages, which is sung both by the Native Americans and by the white men. And you have this incredible montage of them both depicting each other as what their opponents are depicting them as. And it's a very interesting window into human psychology, similar for Beauty and the Beast, which we also teach, because the entire point of the film Beauty and the Beast, and fun fact about Disney, usually they put the moral of the story in like the first 5 minutes of the movie. And so in the Beauty and the Beast, the moral of the story is who could learn to love a beast, right? And so it really asks this question, which was a question that was very much impactful during the Civil Rights Movement, and especially during especially animating Dr. King's philosophy, is this question of who could love a monster, right? Who could learn to love a beast? So yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that we've seen this level of rhetoric, but I think it really emphasizes how important and critical this work is now, perhaps more than ever, in our nation's our nation, the moment that our nation is in right now.
It's incredibly important. Okay, this next one. This is one that I don't really know. I mean, again, I get it. I see it. Criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down and destroy. I understand the never to tear down and destroy because obviously that's not helpful in any way.
Yeah.
But how does one criticize to uplift and empower? Please teach me, Sensei.
Well, I think this is in part also inspired by a lot of Dr. King's sermons and writings. He preached that when we seek the oppression to end, when we seek our own freedom, we also seek the freedom of the oppressor. We believe that the oppressor is caught up in a hell of their own making as well, and we seek their liberation as well, in as much as we seek our own. Another way to think of it is, if you were to think of a human being and you were to if you understand that a human being that is insecure overcompensates for that insecurity in bad ways, in maladapted ways, then it stands to reason that your job as someone interacting with that human being to ensure or to do all you can to ensure that bad behavior doesn't continue, you would need to make sure you're not contributing to the levels of insecurity that they're experiencing. So the not tearing down or not criticizing to tear down or destroy is part of not contributing to that insecurity, but also uplifting and empowering is a part of not contributing to that insecurity. So the opposite of insecurity is obviously security. So you want to do all you can to make that person that you're speaking to understand that you're coming from a place where you actually care about that person, because people change oftentimes in response to how they are communicated to. So Maya Angelou has this wonderful quote where she says, if you tell a person over and over again, they are nothing, they're less than nothing, they will say to you, oh, you think I am nothing? I will show you where nothing is. And they will become even worse than what you have accused them of being. And the moral of the story is that a person cannot develop character unless they are valued. Alex Haley, the author of the biography of Malcolm X, also said, find the good and praise it. And what you appreciate will appreciate. So whether it's whatever you put in will come out. So I think that those are all some ideas that help to, synthesize into the second rule.
That is so good. That is so deep. That's so big. We could spend a long time talking about that. I love this idea of, I could see so many conversations going a completely different direction. Yeah. If you started out, right? We could be on completely opposite ends of the political, societal, cultural spectrum. Mm-hmm. But if I let that person know, I see you, mm-hmm. I value who you are and what you have to say. Let's learn together.
Yeah.
Instead of fuck you for thinking that way. How could you? How dare you?
Yeah.
I mean, if you start out the conversation with I love you and I see you, you're my fellow brother, you're my fellow sister. If when you win, I win, and when I win, you win, let's lift each other up. Yeah. My God, like that conversation is going to go way different.
Yeah, it's a totally different conversation.
That's incredible. Okay, let's move on. Not because I want to, but because we don't have all the time in the world.
Sure.
Try to root everything you do in love and compassion. Again, makes total sense. What if people follow that? I assume also that these are 1, 2, 3 sort of in order, right? It seems like they need to be done in order, right?
Yeah.
In terms of shifting the worldview, you can't. If someone is involved in the current heated rhetoric and mm-hmm. they're contributing to the problem instead of being an exception to the problem,
right?
You can't start by rearranging your brain and your mind and your heart and your soul to do everything love and compassion if you're still seeing people as political abstractions.
Exactly.
So this is obviously a progression. How does one, as they're going through these points and as they're reorienting their lives, their rhetoric, their speech, their thoughts around these three things, what are some practical ways that someone can begin to root everything they do in love and compassion?
Well, the truth is that the third principle is basically the culmination of the first two, and the practice of the first two principles ends up being a practice in rooting everything you do in love and compassion. So
if you do 1 and 2,
you are doing 3.
Number 3 is going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So practically, I think, again, it starts with probing yourself. Self-love is a critical piece of this. We are hard on ourselves often as human beings, don't give ourselves space for making mistakes or for, not always having, a good day, for example. And so it's important to cultivate an attitude of love first for yourself, and being able to give yourself the space to, like I said, make mistakes. But also another way to cultivate self-love, I think, is, and I highly recommend that people do this, I started doing this year, is to develop some kind of meditation practice. And the reason for that is very simple. From a biological perspective, our brains are one of the most probably sophisticated organs that exists on planet Earth. It's made up of a limbic system, which is super, super, super old, also known as the reptilian system. It's responsible for our fast thinking, either or forms of thinking. It helped us survive when we were evolving in the jungles. It helps us make quick decisions. So we have that limbic system, but we also have the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for slowing things down, executive functioning, thinking things through. It's far younger than the limbic system. But because we live in the 21st century, or although we live in the 21st century, we haven't necessarily updated our software system in our heads to slow down. And oftentimes we deploy the limbic system in situations where it doesn't need to be deployed. Not everything is a threat of such epic proportions to who we are and our fundamental existence. So one of the things that helps us slow down and recognize the negative stories that sometimes play over and over again in our head that are part of why we develop insecurity so strongly, a way to slow that down is to start meditating. Because when you meditate, you can just begin to notice the stories that you're telling yourself. You begin to bear witness, and then you begin to develop the capacity to say, oh, that's just a story. I can change it to another story, right? So I think that's a huge component of this, because it also helps you to practice that self-love and give yourself the space. And not only that, once you start recognizing that within yourself, when you interact with people, whether online or in the real world, you can begin, I think, to notice that sometimes, or actually, quite frankly, many times, oftentimes, human beings project from whatever story is going on in their head onto you. And so you can begin to recognize that. And instead of responding to the story that they're projecting, you can ignore that and respond directly to the human being. So a person can be really, let's say, I actually had a conversation with someone a couple weeks ago who was like going on and on, complaining about the political landscape. I just met this person for the first time, and they were clearly stressed out, right?
Yeah.
And just going on and on about the news media and all of this. And I was like, how much news do you consume on a regular basis? And he said, way too much. And I said, yes, I can tell.
Yeah.
Like I immediately knew everything that he was saying, all the rhetoric he was saying was really a facade for something else that was going on underneath the layers of all of that. And so I needed to speak to that person as opposed to the story that he was projecting. And that's a real clarifying process, a liberating process, to be able to recognize that, again, both within yourself and within your neighbor. So that are two practical ways, I would say, to practice self-love. And then you can try to do that with others as well.
This is so fucking good. I love that you started with that one of the main ways that you see number 3 sort of lived out is this self-love. Mm-hmm. I've always been super bad at that.
We all are, myself included. Yes.
But I grew up the second oldest of 12 kids. My older brother, who's wonderful, when we were teenagers, trying to help mom and dad with all the kids, like he made a bunch of terrible decisions, and I assumed that role because of my personality. I had no problem assuming that role of like the older child, but I had that thrust upon me, and so I've always been like my MO. My immediate response is to always take care of other people, and I have exhausted myself to the point of burnout many times in my life, just taking care of people and not taking care of myself. And so it's awesome how these are like what you're doing with Theory of Enchantment is pretty close to what I've been sort of preaching with Let's Give a Damn. And that is there's three steps for giving a damn. Number 1 is you've got to give a damn about yourself first. So many of us here give a damn and they're like, oh, got to go out there and save the world. Well, first of all, you can't save the fucking world. Right. So stop, never, like literally give that up right now. That you can't do that. But you've got to start with giving a damn about yourself. And that is that self-care, that self-love. Do that hard work first. Do that homework. Do that really, really hard work for some of us that have been hurt in so many different ways. Then number 2 is give a damn about each other. And that is, those are the people that are around you. Those are your family, your friends, your partner, your spouse, your kids, whatever it is. The people that you're going to pour into them, they're going to pour into you all the time, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Make sure that group is healthy.
Yeah.
Because you're going to need it as you go to step 3, which is then give a damn about others. That's when these bigger projects that you're going to take on, whether it's your main occupation or it's something you do on the side, before you can give a damn about the world, you've got to do those other 2 steps, or else you're going to do it in an unhealthy way. You're going to hurt more people than you help, and you're not going to get much done, frankly, because you can't go straight to number 3, fix everything without doing that homework first. So I love that. If you do 1 and 2, you're gonna automatically already be living out, rooting everything in love and compassion.
Yeah, because if you practice the art of self-refinement, then the way you move about in the world will change, because the nature of your perceptions will change.
That's wonderful. I love it. Couldn't have said it better myself. I'll let you say it. Okay, so okay, so now we've got the theory of enchantment, not all of it, obviously it's big, and I look forward to getting to know this more in the days, weeks, and months ahead. But for now, we've gotten sort of a 30,000 foot view, who you're about, what you're doing. Now let's talk about some current day shit that's going on. And I would love to get your feedback on things that are going on. So we've got this, let me look at the time, just make sure we've got time to do all of this. I'll try to not talk as much in these last few minutes.
I'll try to synthesize.
Okay. Well, get it all out, and we'll end where we end. It'll be a natural place to end. But okay, so cancel culture. The left and the right do it oh so well, and the right thinks they don't do it, and they accuse the left of doing it. The left thinks they don't do it, and they accuse the right of doing it, and both do it super, super well, and far too often. And we fail to recognize, again, it's easy to cancel somebody. And I'm not saying, let me also say, there are certain things that we should not have people in positions of power anymore for, right? Like I'm so fine with us canceling, if you want to use that word, the Roger Ailes of the world. And, people like that, right? You did some horrible things. You don't get to speak into what we're doing now. You don't get to be in a position of power. But then there are so many things that happen all the time that we just reduce it to you did something that I don't like, and it might have been a big thing. And so you're done. Or the one that Chappelle gets on all the time. He's like, I did something 20 years ago. I said something. You're not accounting for any growth that I've had since then. You're not accounting for anything in between. You dug up some tweet from 11 years ago, and now you're done. Yeah. That only hurts. That only harms. And so speak into how the theory of enchantment can keep us from canceling each other all the time, and instead seeking places to build bridges where there are currently huge divides, huge chasms.
Well, this is also goes back to the first principle, not treating people like caricatures. Caricatures are snapshots in time. They don't account for the totality of a life, which ebbs and flows and changes, to Chappelle's point. But also, theory of enchantment is very much rooted in a restorative justice framework. I do find it fascinating that folks on the left and the right, quite frankly, who have expressed support for restorative justice frameworks still promote cancel culture. So we teach the redemptive, I think it's called the Redemptive Project, with Van Jones on CNN, where he goes to prisons and helps facilitate conversations between victims and their offenders, to really promote this idea of restorative justice, a holistic sense, as opposed to a punitive sense of justice. So that's how we try to teach people to gravitate more toward that vision as opposed to cancel culture vision. Cancel culture is also, I think, a byproduct of our deeply transactional society, a very hyper-consumerist society. Even the language of cancel culture is very consumerist, like you're canceling a transaction. Contributes to this idea of the disposability of human beings. So I think there's a cultural piece to it, but I do think that there are other elements, particularly within art, that speaks to the more redemptive restorative justice model. I think that if you're an artist, especially of the caliber of someone like Kendrick Lamar, where you're deeply introspective, where you're constantly talking about, we teach DNA, so he says, I got power, poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA. All of these things that exists within every single human being, the capacity to do good, the capacity to do evil, both potentials existing at once. Human beings are dual nature in that way. So I think that the more we put these texts that are very popular, actually, and are very considered to be an art form in front of people and say, you shouldn't just consume pop culture passively, you should consume it actively because there's wisdom here. And now that you've studied Kendrick Lamar, now that you've studied, the Redemption Project, how can you apply it in your own daily life and apply it to how you perceive, how you treat those who make mistakes? You want to create a society not that is void of accountability, but that gives people a chance to grow. And again, it's so ironic to me that if I were to tell someone, there are plenty of people for whom, if I were to say to them, if I were to explain to them the backstory of an individual, like I explained to you earlier, who experienced abandonment and parental neglect and so gravitated toward a gang as a result, and I explained to them that backstory, there's a massive chance that the person I'm speaking to would have a great amount of compassion for that person. It wouldn't just be punitive in their judgment of them. However, if I, gave them, if I just simply said a Republican or a Democrat, depending upon their political views, did X, Y, and Z without any backstory, and X, Y, and Z was something they found or perceived to be offensive or a bad thing, they would be more likely to immediately be punitive and just end it, just cancel them, etc., get them out. And so there's a disconnect. And our culture, much like we are as human beings, is a duality. And so I think it's a challenge, but I think it's a worthy challenge. I think it's a winnable challenge to get people to think more in the restorative justice paradigm than in the cancel culture paradigm, because we already have stories from our culture that teach it.
I love the idea of restorative justice. I'm a big Brian Stevenson fan, as everybody should be. And it's funny you brought up Van Jones, because he's been one of the people that I've thought about this past week, right? So, right after the election, right after the media called it for Biden, he had this, there's this clip that went viral. Maybe you've seen it, of him, 3 minutes, very heartfelt.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
We can, it's easier to be a parent tonight. It's easier to be a dad tonight. We can tell our kids that decency matters, that integrity matters, that character matters. It's a wonderful clip, right? And then on fucking clockwork, all of a sudden there's all these people on the left posting pictures of him with, the Trump's kids, right? Or different people in the Republican, political space. And there's even one of him in the Oval Office with Trump and a bunch of other people. I don't even know the context of it, but they're trying to
probably the first act, ironically.
Yeah. No, I think it was that photo. Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, no, this guy can't be on our side.
That's so ironic.
Because he has stood side by side to these evil people, right?
Yeah.
And I don't agree with this current administration in almost every single way.
Right.
But all of a sudden it's like, let's try to cancel him because he has stood side by side to them. It's
ironic on a meta level, because again, Van Jones has specifically been active with this administration in getting this administration to pass restorative justice measures with regard to the prison system. So it's a lack of, I think, vision on the part of these people who tweet about this. And it's like, it would be almost hilarious if it wasn't also sad.
Yeah, no, it's definitely more sad than it is hilarious. It's like, I want to laugh at how funny this is, but no, it's not funny.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty terrible. Okay, let's spend the last few minutes on...
Let's lift the spirits of the people.
Yeah. No, we're not there yet. Because I want to talk about I want your sort of, now that it's not hindsight yet, but some really tumultuous times are in hindsight at this point. We've got George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all these crazy things that happened during the global pandemic, right? I'd love your take on who or what you've seen done well in the last few months versus who or what you've seen done poorly in the last few months. Because I'm frankly, it's been a hard few months. I've been out there protesting. I'm obviously against, I'm I understand 100%. Like, I truly understand why people loot and riot. And I understand the overflow, the angst and the anger.
Yeah.
And although I don't want to participate in it, I understand it. And I've been out there marching. I've marched a lot, and I've screamed a lot, and I've yelled a lot, and I've almost been arrested several times this past summer for, being in the middle of all that, demanding justice from, frankly, people in power that were not willing to listen. I mean, 250 of my fellow Nashvillians were arrested this summer alone because they were protesting all this shit that was happening. And we have a bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest in our Capitol building. And we asked for that to be removed. Those are two demands, were that to be removed, because, hello, it should be removed. And two, let's have a conversation with Governor Bill Lee about these matters and how we can properly, responsibly defund the police so we can give more money to these other programs. And he refused to do that. Instead, they spent millions of dollars this past summer on overtime for state police to treat us like shit and arrest a couple hundred of us over the course of the summer. So much has happened, and yeah, I'll stop there. How have these last few months been for you? A strong Black woman living in America, watching all of this happen, and then also trying to get people to look back at your TED Talk, how love can repair social inequality. Most of us are seeing, no, love can't do that. We need to go take it. We need to go take it because those in power aren't going to give it to us without us taking it. So,
classic. I will say that I did go to the protest in Brooklyn, and because my roommate was very much consistently, both my roommate and I are very much fans of Dr. King, and we study Dr. King and teach Dr. King, and he wanted to see if he could live the Kingian way in the protests. And my apartment actually became a meeting ground for activists within Black Lives Matter for like 3 months. And so I was privy to some of the conversations that were going on between, individuals who are mostly among or around my age. So like millennials, and met a lot of different interesting folks. I would say that the difference between in my observation, the difference between, let's say, the civil rights movement generation, King, Lewis, especially, who just passed, and our generation, is that the Kingian generation knew what they were fighting against, but they also knew what they were fighting for. And it was unclear what we were fighting for. We knew what we were fighting against. We knew we were fighting against police brutality and racial injustice, but we did not know what we were fighting for. And I think that because there was a lack of a vision that was rooted in the transcendent and could be articulated across the board, I think that was a challenge. And ultimately, as long as that is the case, that will restrict the movement. I also think that because Black Lives Matter is a decentralized organization, and because anyone you could hold up a sign that says "fuck the police," Black Lives Matter, and you could be another person who holds a sign that says "we need to love one another," Black Lives Matter, and both are representative of Black Lives Matter, which sends a confusing message to folks who are trying to figure all of this out. So that's another challenge. Finally, I'd say, I think, especially when you speak to, this is especially true, you speak to poor Black Americans, and even if you look at, our Black council members here in the city of New York, the rhetoric of defund the police as opposed to reform the police was very problematic. And not to get too political, but we even saw this affect Democrats losing seats in the House. And so the lack of precision with regard to the language and the rhetoric used played a role. And that was all because we didn't know what we wanted. We knew what we were against, but we didn't know what we wanted. And the final thing I'll say, maybe not. Second to last thing I'll say is, we need to reform the police. The majority of Americans are actually pro-reforming the police, especially when you use that language specifically. So that's a good thing that we should, some political class should take that and run with it. But So that's a good thing. But I will also say that it's important to remember that we are the police. Like the police come from our communities and our neighborhoods. Like the police are our family members.
Wow. Yeah.
Like
Yep.
all of a sudden this year, not all of a sudden, but it seemed as if many of us were somehow, this goes to principle one, it became a thing as if like the police were like aliens from outer space and not like from our communities and our sons and our daughters and our sisters and our cousins and our mothers and our fathers. And so part of police accountability, or if you want police accountability, it actually requires that you care about the police. And so the two are interdependent. We teach, this might sound funny, but we teach the Lion King in Theory of Enchantment. We teach what the circle of life is actually about. When Mufasa teaches his son Simba, we are interdependent. We are all connected in this giant circle of life. That sounds very lovely and fluffy when seen through the prism of a Disney film, but it's actually quite serious. And we need to realize, just as we preach restorative justice, and just as we preach having a less punitive system, it goes both ways. We can't be selective in how we approach this. The fact of the matter is that, so when I went to the protest, I actually held up a sign that was also from a Kendrick Lamar song. And the sign said, "A fatal attraction is common, and what we have common is pain." And it's from one of my favorite Kendrick Lamar songs, Poetic Justice. And it's like, yes, we are as civilians accosted often by the police and, experience PTSD because of those physical offenses. And at the same time, police officers who encounter violence and crime and put their lives on the line to stop that also encounter PTSD and also don't have usually the resources to get therapy or get healed and take that PTSD right back into the field when they're on the beat. And so what we have is a case of mirror images. What we have is a case of people who are broken and traumatized, like crashing into one another. And we are finding it very difficult to be able to realize that because one of us is wearing a uniform and the other isn't. And this is why, ultimately when COVID is over, I'd love to put together like an art exhibit that's a part of Theory of Enchantment that actually has like visual images of people side by side that you would assume were enemies. But if I told you, and maybe they are, but if I told you their backstories, you would actually see that these two enemies who are sworn against each other are mirror images of each other and experiencing the same kind of pain and the same kind of trauma and dealing with it in bad ways. And so I think that we need healers, and I think that we need more psychologists and sociologists, but not separate from the police. I think that work also needs to be brought into police departments as well, because in as much as the civilian population needs to heal, police officers need to heal as well. So
I wish we had another hour just on that because I think there's a lot more. Maybe we'll do another one of these sometime.
Sure.
Like I think I interviewed Alex Vitale. Do you know who that is? Does that name
It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure.
So he's actually a neighbor of yours there in Brooklyn. He's a professor, and he wrote a book called The End of Policing. So he gives a very compelling argument for abolishing the police, and what that would look like. What a world without what we know. Obviously, we're not saying abolish protection, but abolish what we our current system of policing and the good that would do. I when COVID is all over, one of my we guess we could do it in this age. It's really easy to get people together online, but I think I want to be part of a conversation at some point where we have these different views, the abolish, the defund, the reform, because I think it's somewhere in there, right? Like I think it's somewhere in there, the answer. I understand the abolish the police argument. I understand the defund the police argument, and I understand the reform the police argument, especially when you go back to the Theory of Enchantment and you stop caricaturing people and stereotyping them by their work uniform. Yep. Instead of remembering that they are our brothers and sisters and neighbors and friends, and they put that uniform on and go to work. But at the end of the day, they're taking all that shit off and they do stuff with us and they hang out with us and they're part of our community. And gosh, there's so much to learn there. But we are out of time for now. This is super fascinating. I think you're amazing. And I'm excited to, continue to get to know you and your work in the days, weeks, and months ahead. Before we sign off, do you have what do you want people to go look for after this? Where are you online? Where's Theory of Enchantment online?
Yeah, so check out theoryofenchantment.com. We primarily provide all of this training to business clients, but also individual consumers as well. And especially if you're looking for a very robust anti-racism program to bring to your businesses, highly recommend checking out theoryofenchantment.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at Theory of Enchantment and on Twitter at Enchant Theory.
Because they only have 15 characters on there.
Exactly.
Or else you would have the whole damn thing. Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
My friends, I truly hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Chloé Valdary. I'm such a huge fan of her work and wisdom. Thank you, Chloé, for joining us today. Visit letsgiveadamn.fm for links to her website and social media and all of that. And while you're on letsgiveadamn.fm, you can sign up for our email list, and you can also listen to the other 180 podcast conversations we have there. Seriously, friends, thank you for listening. I'm honored and humbled and blown away that so many of you come back week after week after week to listen to these conversations. This show is edited and produced by Chad Michael Snavely and the team at Sound On Sound Off Studios. Let's Give a Damn is part of the Matter Media family. And again, you can reach out to me anytime and for any reason at hello@letsgiveadamn.fm or text me 646-328-6414. Sending love and peace to each one of you. Stay safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.